Hi, I'm Tony, and today we're going to take a look at my pixelated quilt patterns. I talk all the time about how easy my patterns are to make. You can literally put a quilt together start to finish in a single day for any of my basic quilt patterns, just like these right behind me. But I always get asked, well, what about this or what about this? So today I'm going to go through every single step of this pattern, but I'm not making this quilt. I am making a quilt for somebody that's purchased a couple of quilts for me, and he would like an additional one. So you'll see what quilt it is when I reach the very, very end. But I'm going to show you these because every single one of my patterns are the exact same. So let's get into it and take a look at the Quiltoni quilt patterns. Now remember, with any pattern, you always want to read all of the instructions before you get started. I'm not going to read all the instructions to you. I'm just going to go step by step and explain everything. And I also will have the explanations down below, well, the timetable down below of all of the steps as I talk about it. So that way, if you need to come back and just review, let's say, step number 3, then you can come back and just take a look at number 3. So that'll all be down below. Just click on it and you can go there. I'm also going to be talking about a lot of videos. So there's all sorts of videos that I have made as a companion to these, just showing you all sorts of little tips and tricks and things like that. So if there is a video that will deep dive even more into what I'm talking about, I'll make sure I talk about it, and that is also linked down below. Now, I'm not going to talk about lot of the stuff that I'm using, any of the materials, like my Sew Tights mat, or my Quiltoni templates. I'm just going to use these things, but I am going to I'm going to put the links down below, so if you are interested in any of it, it's easy for you to find. But that is completely optional and your choice. This is not a video of, hey, buy all these things. This is a video of, let's take a look at each one of my patterns. So first thing you want to do, if we take a look at the instructions, before cutting strips of fabric, make sure your fabric is washed and ironed. Well, let's talk about that for a moment. So whenever you have fabric, you don't have to wash and iron this. This is just put in here because on a general habit, you should wash and iron your fabric before using it. However, if all of your fabric has not been washed, it is perfectly okay not to wash any of it. The moment you wash any of the fabrics, or if they are already pre-washed, you need to wash them all just to make sure. Also, please, please, please do not wash pre-cut fabrics. These are already cut and ready to go, and that includes my kits. So if you're watching this video because you've picked up one of my kits for one of my patterns, do not wash your fabric, okay? Any pre-cut fabrics, no matter what it is, do not wash them, okay? All right, so now we've got that out of the way. The rest of this is just talking about general sewing practices. So you want to cut from the selvage to the selvage, and this is the selvage. So the selvage is on the bottom. So you want to cut selvage to selvage. So when you're cutting fabric, I like to fold it in half like this as I'm cutting it because it makes it a lot easier. You can, of course, cut it the entire length of a fabric. So you can cut your fabric this way, or like I said, fold it in half and cut it this way. But either way, you're cutting it selvage to selvage. You're cutting your strips like this. Always trim the selvage before you begin cutting, and I will show you when I do some cutting. Always use a 1/4 inch seam. Now, if you've made quilts before, this may seem, well, easy and everyone knows this. However, if you make clothing uses a 1/2 inch seam. So if this is your first quilt, you may not know that you use a 1/4 inch seam. Right side and wrong side of fabric. Again, if you've dealt with fabric before, you may know this. However, if you've never sewn before, you don't. When you're looking at fabric, this is the right side of the fabric, the one with the design or the most color. This is the wrong side of the fabric, the other side, the back side of the fabric. So whenever I say, you know, sew something right side to right side or something else, that's what we're talking about. The color. So this is the right side, this is the wrong side, which is the back. It's just a lot easier to do that. Step number 1, we're going to cut our fabrics in our chart. So no matter what pattern you're using, it's all set up like this. The 3.5 and 2-inch strips are for all of my beginner patterns, all of the basic lap quilts. If you are doing a one of my books or blocks of the month or something like that, please, please, please do not have that be your very first quilt. Those are the advanced patterns. So if this is your first quilt, please grab one of the lap quilts. In fact, if you don't want to pay any money, that's fine. I've got a free pattern on my website when you sign up for my newsletter. So take a look at the lap quilts and we'll do those. So we're cutting strips. So we're cutting each of these as a 3.5-inch strip and as a 2-inch strip. So in the case of the pattern I'm making today, this is my background color. So I'm going to cut these strips, and I'm using my Sew Tight mat. It's magnetic, so this actually is a really cool magnetic structure. Now whenever you're sewing your strips, if you haven't sewed your strips, wow, Tony, words are so hard. When you're cutting your strips, make sure you always cut off a little bit before you get going. In fact, let me just take this and I'm going to line this up right along here. There we are. So cutting our strips, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to make sure this is perfectly lined up, just like that. And there we are. So this is now what's called squared up. So you should always square up your fabrics before you start cutting your strips. If you have purchased one of the kits, your strips is already cut for you, so you can actually skip step 1. All right, so in this case, this is my background fabric. So I need 5 3.5-inch strips and 3 2-inch strips for the pattern the mystery pattern that I am making. So I'm going to line this up, making sure that I'm at 3.5 inches. There's 1 and 2, and you get the idea. So all I'm doing, in fact, let me cut one of the 2-inch ones, that way you can see what that looks like. So we're doing the 2-inch. There we are, just like that. So you get the idea. So you're cutting just the strips like this, the 3.5-inch strips and the 2-inch strips. So I'm going to cut all of the strips for my mystery quilt that I am making, and then I'm going to come back and I'll show you the next step. Now, after cutting all of my strips, as you see, I've got everything all laid out here. After cutting all of these strips, I also iron them. Now, I like to cut my solids the same way I like to cut my combined pieces, and that's 2 at a time. So I keep that in mind whenever I'm doing these patterns, which is why sometimes you may think, oh, well, I could have gotten an extra piece out of here, but there's another strip. It's because I use the mentality of a general 42 to 44 inches. Okay, let's use a 20-inch times 2 for the fabrics. So I went ahead and I ironed it, so make it easy for my next step of cutting. So now once we have those, this next part from the 2-inch strips is only in some of the patterns, not all of them. So some of the patterns, you're actually taking some of these 2-inch strips and cutting them in half. For my mermaid, you have that. I know there's at least 3 or 4 other patterns that you have this. If you don't have this little from the 2-inch strip, cut this in half, ignore this part, skip on to the next area, to the actual 3.5-inch strips. So in mine, I do have a couple I have to cut in half for my mystery quilt. Let's see, I have black. I'm going to go in order to make sure I've got them. So my black, I need 2 of them cut in half. Now, how you cut these in half? Remember, we just cut these strips, so there's no reason we'd cut this in half again, because we just, or cut it in half this way. because that's how we just cut those, right? So when you're cutting them, you're cutting here along where you just ironed. So there's 1.5, 2.5. I also need 2, let's see, my other ones are fine. I need green. This is, technically I have this for green, but I need 2 of those in half. One is not in half. This just takes a quick moment. And then I've got dark red. I am not cutting in half, so that is fine. My red, one of these is going in half. And I don't need, oops, that goes here. I've got to organize them a certain way, right? I need to have my ones I've cut in half in one pile and my whole ones in another pile so I don't get confused. Tan. Did I? Oh, I apparently picked up the tan and the gray while it's in there. Let's see, tan needs to get cut in half. There we are. My white gets cut in half. And 2 grays. I only have 2 grays. So they both get cut in half. Now, once you've done that, or if you don't need to do that, you go on to the next one. Now we're going to start cutting our pieces. So this is from the 3.5-inch strips. So in the case of, let's do the red for the mermaid, it wants 1 3.5 by 6.5 rectangle, 1 3.5 by 3.5 square, and I'm sorry, 4 3.5 by 3.5 squares, and 3 2-inch by 3.5-inch rectangles. Well, I also have red for my mystery quilt, so let's bring that over. And you have a couple of ways that you can do this. You can do a traditional ruler where you're cutting it along like that. You could use a stripology ruler in order to do it. You can do a magnetic ruler in order to do it. Or you can do my templates that are meant for this. Now, with my templates, we always have to cut off, and this is where, I'm sorry, not just with my templates, with all templates, you have to cut off the selvage. So let's line this up. I like to use the lines on my cutting mat so I know that everything is perfectly straight. And this is what I mean by cutting the selvage off. Remember I said I was going to show you that? So you make sure that all of that fabric gets cut off. Now there's some selvages where you can't really see the color. Oh, the black is that way. So with the black I'm using, you see how it's kind of, fuzzy towards on the end? But the selvage also includes all of these little holes. This is the area of the fabric that the big old machines have gripped into the fabric in order to apply the color. So make sure you cut off all of this, including all of these little holes. If you are a non-waste person, I apologize ahead of time with how much waste there is in my patterns. But if you're a non-waste person, there are some patterns out there for selvages. So if you want to save your selvages, by all means do that. All right, so for my mystery pattern, I do not need any 6.5s. I do need 7 3.5s. So I'm going to cut 4 of these because I'm going to cut 8. There we are. There's 2. I have found with my new Famore rotary cutter, it's so much easier just to hold it like this. I know that's not the traditional way, but man, does holding the rotary cutter this way feel good. And it's ergonomic on my wrist. I don't have to worry about any of it. It is pretty amazing. There we go. And then I need 9 of the 2s. Now you notice with mine, the whole thing is a 6.5. This is the 3.5. This is the 2. So it's got a single template for all of them. Here we are. 2, 4, 6, and that's all I'm going to do for right now. because I'm not going to sit and bore you with all of my cutting of all of it. But that is then how you cut your pieces. So I'm going to cut all of this. I'm going to cut all of these pieces, my solid pieces. And then when I get to here, to step number 2, I will come back and I will show you that one. I forgot to mention, okay, no, I'm not going to show you that yet. I forgot to mention, if you wanted more information about how to use these templates, I do have a video down below that you can watch if you're interested in learning more. Step 2, we want to take our 2.5-inch strips and we want to sew them right sides together for each of the following combinations. And we're going to pull all those combinations out. So depending upon your pattern, you may then take your combinations. So in my case, let's see, my dark red, I am combining with a black, just like that. Yep, these are my solids, great. And I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew this together just like this. This is also called stripping, where you're taking the right sides to right sides. Now, if you are using any batik fabric or complete solid color fabric, there is no right side. You can just choose which one you want. And this one, obviously, this is our right side. So I'm going to sew 1/4-inch seam down at the machine with all the stripping. If you need to see a video on what stripping is and how to do it, I have one linked down below. So I'm going to take these to my sewing machine. I'm going to sew all of these together in the different combinations, and I'll come back and I will show you the next step. Once you have all of your strips sewn together, the immediate next step is to cut each of these newly combined strips in half. So this is the question I get the most often, is how do you cut this in half? Well, if you've sewn this together already, you're not going to cut it this way, because then I don't know. So basically you take your strips that you just cut, fold them in half this way, and I like to line up the most optimal place. So I line up the salvages with the salvage so that I get the most amount of strip that I can use, and then cut that in half. Then we iron them in opposite directions, and I will show you that next. So when ironing in opposite directions, I always like to set the seam. So iron it down and then iron it up. Now it is important that you iron these in one direction. So in this case, we're ironing this towards the black. And if it doesn't lay nice and flat, you can use a little bit of spritzer. I like the Mary Ellen's Best Press, which is a starch that is, it's different. It's amazing, and I love it. It's a really, as you see, it's a really, really nice one. And then towards the red. Do not iron these seams open. You want to make sure that you're ironing them to one side, because whenever you're pixel quilting, it's important that you can nest the seams. And I will show you nesting the seams in a bit, but this is how you then iron them. And then there is one set. Now when you're doing your ironings, if you do have half strips, you do want to cut those in half as well and iron those towards the different colors. Now after you have all of your strips ironed, it should look like this. You should have the same exact color on the top and the bottom. One, the seam should be ironed up, and the other, the seam should be ironed down. This is what is called nesting the seams. Whenever you put two together, just like that, and it's got reverse. So if you're new to nesting of the seams, you want some more explanation or why we do this, I do have a video down below. All right, so let's completely nest both of our strips. You know what? I like to have, no, that's fine. I like to have the part on the left, but I also like to have the top fabric point down, and it doesn't look like I can do that with this one. I ironed it weird, but that's okay. So what I'm doing is I'm using my fingers to make sure that both seams are completely lined up. Then I'm going to use the grid on my mat to line this up to make sure that this is perfectly straight. You can use, again, whatever acrylic cutting systems, templates, whatever you want. So you can cut using a regular cutting ruler. Ruler, that's the word. A stripology ruler, or my templates. Now, remember, you do still have to cut off the end over here. We have to square this up, which is why I like to line it up along this line right here, because then I can just line my template up on the line as well. So we want to make sure that that is completely lined up, just like that. Then you cut your 3.5-inch strips, your 3.5-inch sections, or your 2-inch sections. So these are the exact same size pieces that you cut over here. It's just that they're combined. So in my case, I need to get 4 sets of 8 of the 3.5. That means I'm cutting this 4 times. So there's 1, and there is if you're using my template, there is a non-stick coating on the back that, as you see, well, non-stick, I'm sorry, there is a grippy, sticky coating. Wow, words are hard. On the back, that whenever you pull it away like this, you can do that, and it prevents this piece that you're cutting from moving. Oops, there we are. I moved it a little bit, so I got to put it back. There you are. Perfect. Now, you should have, in this case, I have 4 sets of 8 for this combined color. I like to take them and separate them into 2 piles. So this is going to make it easier whenever you take your pieces to then lay out for each of the rows. And you notice my piles, I have 1 where the seams are pointing towards the black, and 1 where the seams are pointing towards the red. So we'll take a closer look at that whenever we are actually combining all of the pieces together. So now I'm going to cut all of the pieces for my mystery quilt, and then I will come back and I will show you how to start laying things out. Our next step is step number 4. We're going to lay out all of the pieces. But before we do that, look ahead and see if your step number 5 is to assemble the horizontal pieces, or if step 5 is to assemble the rows. Your pattern may or may not have horizontal pieces to assemble. If it does, you can skip ahead and do that first. If you don't have space to lay out all of your pieces, if you have a smaller space like I do, it's perfectly okay to just skip this step, go to 5, do this first, and then go back. My mystery quilt has 5 horizontal pieces that I need to assemble. And like I said, I have a smaller space that I work with, so I like to do that. And then when you're assembling them, just assemble either the top or the bottom, and just like this. Now, whenever you're taking a look at it, remember we talked about those nesting seams. If you read the instructions for step number 4, it says to make sure the piece next to it is nested. So if you have 2 seams, so for example in the mermaid, row number 3, I have opposite pieces. You have to make sure that they're in opposite directions for how the seam is facing so you can nest it. The same thing should go for the horizontal pieces. In this case, there's only a single one. Doesn't make a difference which way you iron the seam, if the seam goes towards the top or the bottom. But take a look at your pattern. If your pattern has horizontal pieces that are next to each other as you're assembling this, just make sure one of them irons towards the bottom and then the other is ironed towards the top whenever you're ironing them. Now that our horizontals are assembled, I'm going to go back to step number 4 and start laying out my rows. Does not make a difference if you want to start at the top or if you want to start at the bottom for your rows, as long as they are assembled. Now you notice that there are arrows over here. That's where that nested seams is also going to come into place. When you nest seams, one of the seams is pointing that way, the other is pointing that way, and they're going to butt right on up together. So make sure if there are pieces that have seams next to each other that they're opposite. So let me show you what I mean. In this case, oh, and also if you have a piece that is pointing to the left or the right, like this one right here, that arrow should be the way that the seam is pointing. So my mystery quilt, in this case, I need a background and a black pointing towards the black. So this is my first piece, and you notice how my seam is going this way because the arrow of this row is going this way. So I'm going to put that one down, and then I am going to place the rest of my pieces out. Now you notice how whenever I lay my pieces out, I'm grouping them up in sets of 2. That is so I have extra room because I have a small space that I am working with. So I want to make sure that I have enough room for that space. So I know I'm pinning these 2 together, and so because of that, I know that I can group them. Now in this case, I have a piece, and with the piece that is next to it for this combined piece, the piece next to it, oh, yeah, nope, this way, there we are, is that one. Because there's not 2 pieces next to each other that are both combined, I don't have to worry about which way this piece is facing. The next 2 pieces I do though. So in this case, I have this piece here, and the next piece is another combined piece. So I grabbed the one that is pointing down towards the dark red. So this one that's going to go next to it, I need to make sure it goes up towards the red. And that is why, so like 1, 2, 3, so this is going to the right. So whenever I'm sewing these pieces and my seam is going to go this way, you notice how those nested seams are perfect. So I can sew this together, and remember, it doesn't make a difference if you do it this way or if you iron your seams open for the bulk. Because if I were to iron both of these seams open, it's going to be the same exact amount of fabric that's going to be on the wrong side of bulk as if I iron them in one direction. This way, we get these perfect points every single time. Now, once you lay everything out, assemble each of the rows. And as I said, these arrows are the ways you iron your seams. So after I assemble this row right here, I'm going to be ironing all of everything to the right for this row. For the second row, once I sew them and iron them, I'm ironing all of these seams to the left. And by having opposite arrows and opposite seams, you're going to be able to take that entire row and flip it, and so you can nest it all for those rows. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to lay my entire quilt out. I'm going to sew all of these pieces. I'm going to iron all of the rows in opposite directions, and then I'll come back and show you the assembly of the rows. I have a section of my strips done, ready to go. So now it is time to start assembling those rows. I always find it easier just to take that bottom row and flip it up over the row above it. But of course you can do whichever way you like. When you sew the rows together, it does not make a difference which way you iron them. You can iron them all down, you can iron them all up, you can iron all of the seams open for the row assembly. Completely up to you. So in this case, I'm taking this row and I'm flipping it up over this row. Now the easiest way to do this is to find where all of those points meet. And remember, because we have sewn these rows in opposite directions, it means we have nested seams. So I'm going to make sure that these 2 seams are butted right up against each other and pin. And all I'm doing I call each wave a pass. So all I'm doing this first pass is finding all of those nested seams, making sure they fit together perfectly, and then pinning them. Going all the way down, just like this. Okay, wow, there's lots of nested seams in this row. Okay, is that a nest? No, that is not. This is our last nested seam right here. Now, once you have all of your nested seams done, then I go back and finish pinning everything else. If you have a bubble someplace in your rows, it means that you've used a tighter seam on one of these rows than the other row. And how you fix that, so let's say, for example, let's say this one, this top was bigger than the bottom. All you do is you find that seam. Oh wait, no, that's probably not a good example. Oh, let me use this example over here. Okay, so let's say this area right here. Let's say this top is bigger than my bottom, and I have my two nested seams here. What you do is you stretch the two nested seams, line your fabric up, and then put a pin, put your finger someplace in the middle, and then put a pin in it. If you still have an area here that needs adjusting, same thing. Take the two pins, stretch them out, put your finger where you want to put your pin, and let's do these two. I'm going to put my finger where I put my pin, and then there. And then what you'll find is that lump is spread out among here. Now, wherever your fabric is the longest, so let's say if this case it's the top here that has the most fabric, then what you want to do is make sure that this is the side that you are sewing. If the bottom one had more fabric, then you want to flip it and sew the other side. So whatever side has the most fabric that you need to make sure is evenly spaced, that's the one you want to put on top so that you can gauge it and keep an eye on it. All right, so after we do our first pass, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to put pins in every other seam that doesn't match up. So, oh, there we go. I'm taking my fingers and I'm checking for seams on the bottom as well as the top. There's nothing there. Now, in this case here, I have a large area and it fits nicely, although that's a bit of too much of an area not to have a pin in. So I'm going to put a pin there. You may say, Tony, can I use Sew Tight clips? Can I use the Wonder clips? Can I use something else other than pins? Sure, absolutely. But you can use anything you want to assemble these. But I have personally found, for me at least, using the pins gets those perfect points in there really nicely. So keep that in mind as you are doing your rows. Now, once all of your rows are assembled, sew them all together and just keep on assembling all the rows until you have your main picture, until you have your main quilt. And we'll do some borders next. So we've sewn our rows together. Again, it doesn't make a difference which way your seams point. And now we are doing the borders. I do a very simple method of borders because my patterns are aimed at beginner sewers or beginner quilters. If you want a bigger explanation of borders and other ways you can do borders, I do have a video that I have posted down below that you can take a look at. But for this, it's just a very simple border. So in this case, I have 3.5 inch borders. So all I'm going to do is just lay this out and pin it. That's it. So for the top and the bottom, I'm just pinning these all the way across. And I'm not making sure it's a specific length. In fact, you can see I've got my selvage over here. And yeah, that's it. And your left and right borders, you probably may have combined it with something else. Oh, I forgot to mention, some of my patterns don't have borders. So if you have a pattern where you're like, wait, there's no borders, there's no step for that, fantastic. So far the dust sprites and the pixel eater have no borders, and I may have more coming out that have no borders. I know, of course, you can always add more. So there's additional borders that you can always add after putting these on, and that's it. And so whenever you're finished with this, you're sewing a 1/4 inch seam and then ironing it. Again, does not make a difference which way you iron it. You can iron it towards the border, towards the quilt, or iron it open. It does not make a difference. Now, as you can see, I'm going to just trim that off right there, and I'm going to sew this. We're going to iron it, and then I'm going to add the left and right borders, iron it, and then we have our finished quilt, and that's it. The last instruction is add extra borders or embellishments as you wish. And that is how you do Quiltoni quilt patterns. If you like the way that I have my patterns all set up, I do have a best-selling book, How to Pixel Quilt. Oh no, How to Design Pixel Quilts. Wait, what is the name of my book? I've got a link down below. I think it's How to Design Pixel Quilts, or how to, basically I teach you how to create and design your own pixelated quilt patterns, as well as the 3 different methods of doing it. So the 1 pixel 1 block, stripping, and I teach you how to do my Quiltoni method. All right, ready to see the mystery quilt? So a friend of mine really wanted me to make a red mage. And he wanted it in the same style as our light mage and dark mage. So I present to you the red mage. I do not know if he will ever come out as a pattern, but if he does, this is the very first one I've ever made of him. And it's gonna go to my friend, who I'm going to see at Gen Con in a few weeks. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me for this video. Hopefully it helps answer any questions you've had. If you still have any questions, please feel free to put them below. Or if there was something in the video you want to learn more about that I don't have a video for, or a link below, let me know. I'd be more than happy to take care of that. And of course, I always take suggestions. So if you want me to make a video about something, on how to do something, tell me. Don't forget to like this video, follow me on YouTube, as well as Instagram, Facebook, my Quite Nerdy Quilters Facebook group, Twitch, where I stream live and you can join me. And I think that's all of the I don't know. I think that's all the things.